Good afternoon. My name is Ben Hovland, and I am Chairman of the Election Assistance Commission. Today's video chat is the fourth in a series discussing how election officials can best prepare for an increased usage of vote-by-mail ballots in 2020. For election administrators, the novel coronavirus and COVID-19 have created an environment that demands tough choices regarding the safety of voters, election workers, and their staff. The EAC is working to provide information and resources for election officials by coordinating with state, local, and federal partners and offering whatever support we can at the federal level to help state and local officials administer safe, secure, accessible, and accurate elections. This video is the first to dive down into a specific portion of the absentee or mail balloting process by focusing on how election officials can prepare for an expected increase in absentee vote-by-mail applications. Much of what is possible in a given state will be determined by state law, but today we'll examine a number of options for how election officials handle this issue across the country. We are fortunate to be joined by four experts who have extensive experience in a range of absentee or mail ballot procedures. Tina Barton serves as the city clerk of the city of Rochester Hills, Michigan, and has been an election administrator for 15 years. Tina was conferred the designation of Master Municipal Clerk by the International Institute of Municipal Clerks and Certified Michigan Municipal Clerk by the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks. Tina was appointed by the U.S. Conference of Mayors to the EAC's Board of Advisors and also received a 2018 Cleary Award from the EAC for election innovation for an election day precinct support portal. Jonathan Marks is the Deputy Secretary for Elections and Commissions at the Pennsylvania Department of State. Jonathan began his tenure with the Department of State in 1993 and has served in an impressive range of roles at the Department of State before accepting his current position in February of 2019. Ray Valenzuela Jr. has worked in the field of elections for over 3 decades as the Director of Election Services and Early Voting for Maricopa County, Arizona. He directs the early voting department that presently services 2.4 million registered voters in the county, with almost 1.7 million of those voters on a permanent early voting list. Ray also has served for the past 14 years on the EAC's Standards Board and currently serves as the Vice Chair. And Noah Praetz is a partner in the Elections Group, where he consults on election operations and security, primarily for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. Noah formerly ran elections in Cook County, Illinois. He started in elections as a temporary worker hired to do data entry prior to the 2000 presidential election, and Bush v. Gore had him hooked. Since then, he worked his way through the ranks, doing nearly every job in elections, learning all the pain points and all the opportunities along the way. So we welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us today, and let's jump right into the questions. I'll switch up the order so nobody has to go first every time, but we'll start with you, Ray, based on those impressive stats for Maricopa County. So can you tell us about how voters may obtain an absentee or mail ballot in your jurisdiction?
Sure, and thank you for having us all. In Arizona, we're made up of 15 counties. Each county by statute has a county recorder that is in charge of what we call early voting. Everybody, I know there's some no excuse early voting, absentee balloting, and so on, but for Arizona, we have a no excuse early voting format. And there are 3 ways that a voter can get a ballot. One of them is the mail ballot process, which is we allow for requests that can come online. We have a robust online portal, all 15 counties do, and so too does the state as a centralized partner. They will push those voters through, but for Maricopa County specifically, we have a online present, request.maricopa.vote. I know there's not a lot of Maricopa folks, well, there are a lot of Maricopa registered voters, but I was just pointing out our one of the things is, as I go, I'll hopefully point out some of our lessons learned. And one of the things that we've done for our request folks, on top of providing an online presence, is we bought up maricopa.vote, which allows us to, instead of using recorder.gov/absentee/ASPX, we're using these vanity URLs. Sometimes throughout this presentation, I'll reference them. But again, request.maricopa.vote. We have locations.maricopa.vote, ballotstatus.maricopa.vote. So these are some of the things one of the things I want to point out for our online presence. Voter can also request by phone. We have a call center that's actually a shared call center in our county, which is a good best practice if you can do it. And it's our STAR call center. It's called STAR because the sheriffs, treasurer, assessor, and recorders basically fund this 40, 50 person call center. And we each get a phone number that when we provide to the public, when it comes through, those 40, 50 that wrap up to about 80 during a countywide general can answer voters' calls, take the requests. So by online, phone, and of course by mail. We also have, as you indicated, a permanent early voting list. Since 2007 is a legislation that provided for this sign up. And on that, we have 1.7 million voters of our 2.4 that automatically, I don't like to tell the recorder who I work for that how easy it is, but basically by the push of a button, we're flagging and scheduling 1.7 ballots. That's one of the lessons learned that when we prior to this permanent early voting list was a major human resources for our staffing to take singular requests. But again, we do have that permanent early voting list that a voter automatically gets a ballot 27 days prior in Arizona when we begin mailing, and at the push of a button, literally a job runs and rolls those folks over. And last but not least is our in-person voting, early voting sites. We open those up at that same time point, 27 days out. We have as much as 40 ballot on demand locations open up at that 27-day or in phases. And that allows us to allow a voter who doesn't, for whatever reason, want to do the vote by mail but or lost their ballot can come in. Any one of those 40 sites we can accommodate this. In Maricopa County, we have 7,000 ballot styles to accommodate for the different congressional leds, city, towns. It's a big chore, but because of the ballot on demand process, we can accommodate an in-person voter as well. So online, phone, written, permanent early voting, automatic mailing, or in-person during that 27-day period.
Great, thank you. Tina, do you want to talk about Rochester Hills a little bit? You are muted.
I'm trying, there we go. Sorry
Perfect.
about that. So yeah, good morning. Always excited to talk about Rochester Hills. So in the state of Michigan, we're very decentralized, which means that there are over 1,500 of me in the state of Michigan running elections. And so what that also means is that the local city and township clerks are the ones that are actually running the elections. We're actually the ones processing all of the applications. So in Michigan, we are an application state. You do have to apply for an absentee ballot. And you can do that through a lot of different avenues. That could be through a fax, that can be through email, that can be through the mail, that could be in person, that you would request an absentee ballot, FPCA, whatever those routes might be for you to use to request that absentee ballot. We also no longer require a reason for a request for an absentee ballot in Michigan, which we used to do that. You no longer have to have a reason. We also have permanent absentee lists also. So when the no reason absentee went into play in Michigan, my permanent AB list went from 8,000 people to 15,000 people. I have about 54,000 registered voters in my city with 32 precincts. So we saw our permanent AB list nearly double. And that has been a huge factor in our absentees now, is that ability to apply for one without a reason. But all of those different options are available. Those applications are available on the state of Michigan website, county website, and the local clerk's website. So they can access that in any way to be able to apply for an application.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, can you tell us about the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Sure. So in Pennsylvania, we just added before last year's November municipal elections, an online absentee ballot request. Pennsylvania's legislature in October of last year passed legislation, the governor signed legislation that had a lot of election reforms, including the addition of a mail-in ballot option. So we added that to our online feature. So voters do have that capability to request an absentee or a mail-in ballot online. There's also a paper form that they can either print from our website, get from their county election office, or they can simply send a letter. Our statute does allow voters, if for some reason, you know, with all of this, these stay-at-home orders and social distancing, you know, getting access to a county election office right now may be a struggle. So you could even fill out a letter that provides all of the information necessary, sign that letter, and send it to the county to request an absentee or a mail-in ballot. The online feature has been a huge benefit, particularly in light of everything that's going on right now. You know, giving voters the ability to request online, and we've seen it's already had an impact in the 2019 November election. Typically, we would have around 60,000 absentee requests in a municipal election. We jumped up to almost 90,000. So far for the primary, which is nearly 8 weeks away now, we already have over 330,000 requests. That's both absentee plus mail-in requests together. And about 3/4 of those have come in electronically through the online request feature, which is a huge benefit for our county election officials because it saves them the data entry.
Great, thank you. And Noah, you put in the time in Cook County, so for the purposes of this question, we'll welcome you to represent how Cook County does this.
Sure. It's great to be with you, Ben, and everyone else, former colleagues. So in Illinois, one of the cool features we have is the online request. And I think that's something really important to highlight in the COVID environment. The ability for voters to not have to come in if they choose not to is pretty important for their safety and the value that brings to election officials to potentially decrease their footprint. One of the things we think about in protecting our staffs is the amount of work they have to do do data entry on mail ballot application forms. And when they're not in the office right now, considering how to do that from home can be quite difficult to have significant sort of security implications. So the ability to push the data entry to the voters themselves and have them apply online has a tremendous amount of benefits. I'm glad to hear Pennsylvania's succeeding so well with that. That's one of our sort of big bonuses, I think, in Illinois. You could also send in a form, you know, by mail and have the election officials do that data entry. One of the things that happens quite often around here is campaigns will solicit applications using their own forms and have those sent in. And they're really quite good at drumming up behavior. I bring it up to say that it's an interesting thing for election officials or states to be thinking about are active direct mail campaigns to their voters, trying to incentivize them to vote by mail to get all the benefits that come with it for the operation. One of the things I'll point out are the ones that I appreciate the most. Those direct mail campaigns are ones that are sent specifically to the voter and contain a barcode of the voter's ID on the form, so that on the back end, we had success not having to key in every field of the application. The barcode would bring up most of the voters' information, and it would make the productivity significantly higher. So Illinois is not a huge state. I think statewide it's about 10% of the voters are voting by mail right now. But you know, obviously, the story for November is yet to be written.
Absolutely, thank you. Those are some great flags, and sort of lean into the next question. You know, a lot of you hit on this a little bit, but wanted to talk about how the process may have changed in recent years in your state or jurisdiction for obtaining an absentee mail ballot, and if that has, you know, how what you've seen as benefits or challenges associated with these changes. Jonathan, in particular, you flagged the rollout of the online system, would love to start, if you could start off and talk a little bit more about sort of what's worked well with that. Again, we've heard some of that, but also some of the challenges in implementing that system.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. As I noted earlier, Governor Wolf signed historic, election reform legislation just last October. So the question about what has changed in recent years, it's really what has changed in recent months. We had a very, aggressive window to put a lot of those Act 77 provisions in place. But online absentee, as I said, is something that we launched before last November's municipal election, which I think was a smart way to go. Obviously, you don't want to, launch something like that in a presidential election year if you can avoid it. The big lessons we've learned, aside from some of the technical issues, and I know those have been discussed in previous panels, is really the voter outreach. We were fortunate going into 2020. We had already, in addition to, mail-in balloting and our online absentee requests, we are also upgrading voting equipment across all of our 67 counties. And so we put together a Ready to Vote 2020 campaign that was already in place, with the legislative changes and with COVID-19 and all of the concerns related to that. Having that program already in place, having those tools and that ability to outreach to voters. Because, the biggest challenge, of course, is making sure everyone knows that these tools exist and that they can avail themselves of that. The one limitation we have right now with the online request is it's limited to individuals who have a driver's license or a Pennsylvania Department of Transportation ID. We are going to be rolling out, updates to that prior to the November election. But that's really the only limitation right now. Another thing, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this later, when you talk about, absentee balloting and mail-in balloting, generally are the stakeholders and the partnerships that you have to really leverage as you're making these changes. We worked very early on after enactment of Act 77 to put together a work group or an advisory committee made up of county election officials, county commissioners, as well as department staff, our IT staff, et cetera. But we also engaged all of the vendors that would be impacted by this. Every county, uses a vendor or a group of vendors, print vendors, ballot envelope vendors. So we engaged them early on as well to educate them about the changes that were coming and how it might affect their ability to support their counties.
Great, thank you. It's very helpful. Tina, I know we've talked both a little bit about, or you mentioned some of the changes to Michigan law earlier and also some outreach you've done. Can you talk about some of these changes, the benefits and challenges you've seen, and maybe some of the solutions you found to help address these issues?
Yeah, so thank you. November 2018, Proposal 3 was on our ballot, and as I mentioned, that proposal allowed for no reason absentee voting in the state of Michigan. So typically I would see in one of my elections basically like a 60-40 split, 60% going to the precinct, 40% voting absentee. Our very first election that we had implementation of Prop 3, it was August of 2019, over 81% of the ballots cast in my community were cast by absentee ballot. So a tremendous increase in absentee turnout. So, I mean, I loved that because a few things there. It lessens the lines at the precinct, right? So that's helpful for your precinct workers. It also takes kind of some of the stress off of your precinct workers also, because they don't have the long lines of people waiting. I love that people are taking advantage of this because they're voting, and anytime people vote, that's great. That's what we want. We want people to vote. So if this gives people the ability to vote who maybe weren't going to the precincts, I'd love to see those numbers rise also. We have seen some challenges from that, because in that, and going to 81% absentee, you're seeing volume increase, and that volume increase impacts clerks across the board. So that means that I need longer time to process those ballots, because I have more absentee ballots coming in than I've ever seen before come in. And as we look at that, even in that situation of knowing that we were going to need to ramp up the amount of equipment that we had to process those absentee ballots, you add into that mix that in the state of Michigan, we have the challenge of we are not allowed to start processing until on election day. So as our absentee ballot load increases, the amount of time that we have, or the amount of time that we're allowed to start processing those ballots, has remained the same. So the legislature has not responded to the increase in demand of absentee ballots. So that's something that I'm really pressing for in the state of Michigan, is that they allow us more time to process those absentees, because once my election workers get there at 7 a.m., it's you don't leave until the very last ballot has been processed, till everything is balanced, till every piece of paper has been signed. And for some clerks, as we progress into this, and that increases in the volume, that's going to become an even greater challenge. So the equipment they're going to need to do that. I'm fortunate that I have 4 high-speed tabulators. Most clerks do not have that. So that is something that is a benefit to us, that when we first got new equipment in 2017, I anticipated that we could see no reason absentee at some point in Michigan over the next 10 years. And so I went ahead and purchased at that lower cost on that, with that. So I got those 4-speed tabulators at a lower cost than what clerks are having to pay right now. So that's a challenge that we have, is the equipment and the time also. And so that has also brought on a new level of organization, because that means I have, instead of 15,000 absentee ballots coming in, I could have, twice that coming into my city hall. Where do I put them? How do I organize them? Where do I store them so that they're safe? That means that we're doubling the amount of signature checks that we're doing. That also means as your volume increases, you're increasing more follow-up of people forgetting to sign their ballot, wrong people signing someone's ballot. So it is a good problem to have. I'm really happy to have it in Michigan, but it is kind of a domino effect as we look at this. And I think as we're looking at August and November, considering that, vote at home type models could exist even in greater form across our country if we continue to fight this pandemic as we are, that we have to consider that the funding that we're going to need from the legislature to trickle down to those who are actually implementing these policies, actually the ones that need to purchase the equipment and need to be able to arm themselves properly to process the volume that we're going to see from this type of a situation. I think this will also cause people who maybe in the past haven't always voted absentee to say, hey, I kind of like this. Maybe I'm going to continue to do this. So I'm hoping this is an ongoing increase in the volume of that. And again, encouraging people to vote who maybe necessarily haven't voted in the past. But challenges, again, time to process, equipment, really kind of just organizing your volume and how you're going to do that in your office. And maybe that requires that you have to hire some temporary workers or pull people from the precincts into your absentee counting board.
Thank you. Noah, you mentioned in the previous question, you mentioned some things in your time, both certainly ramping up to online, but also utilizing barcode technology to reduce data entry. Can you talk a little bit more about how on that front end where it's processing the mail or absentee ballot request that you've seen people as they've implemented these changes, how they've also come up with solutions to handle the volume or simplify the process?
Yeah, sure. and I think that's perfect follow from what Tina had to say, because the labor required to as voters shift from the precinct to sending in paperwork is not insignificant, and that does come with costs and quality control issues. So there are tremendous benefits to a well-designed online request tool. So, and I'd recommend that be a kind of thing that's done at the state level. One of the challenges in Illinois is that it's done at the county level, and maybe 20 of the 104 election authorities utilize it. So when you're in a shared media market and you're trying to push people to a tool that's only available to some of the voters that hear it, that's not ideal. And then each county is setting up their sort of own design and construction. Some of it's more or less usable. So I think the recommendation would be that the state take this on to support all their voters, tie it in with the statewide voter registration database, and push the data straight down to the election officials. So another thing that's valuable is when there's direct mail being sent to voters, trying to incentivize them or get them to vote by mail. Putting the website for the online request system is very valuable. I mean, that's the stream that election officials, I think, will prefer their data coming through and not coming through paper. One of the wrinkles are that campaigns often like, and the vendors that they hire like to show the return on the investment. So they would say, apply for a mail ballot, send the application to me. I'll do data entry so that I can tell the funders that our outreach got, 10,000 requests. And then they'll take that mail and they'll send it to the election official to mail it in. And that creates problems both from time, the amount of time it gets to the voter, the ballot ultimately does, and then the election official is held accountable. So we tried to work in conjunction with campaigns to provide ways that if they're gonna do outreach on vote by mail applications, that we would find a way to give them data on the back end. If the voter came from one of their mailings, we would find a way to give that back to them so that they could both work within the construct that election officials prefer, but also continue to get kind of their return on investment information.
Great.
But I do want to add that the barcode is one of the most important things. If you can imagine getting in Rochester Hills, 60,000 application requests. They take a couple minutes to process if you're keying it in manually. You can cut that down to about 10% of the processing time, meaning all of your workers are 10 times as efficient. That's huge when it comes to money and time, and then running everything else you need to do in the office.
Great, thank you. And Ray, certainly in your time in Maricopa County, you've seen a lot of change as it relates to this. If you could talk us about some of that change and how sort of the challenges and benefits you've seen or processing absentee ballot or mail ballot requests. I believe you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great, thank you.
I certainly can. For the decades that I've been, most of it with Maricopa, all the way down to when we had statutes about tying your horse before you vote. So, we got some antiquated stuff, but in Arizona, and some of the stuff, and Noah touched really solid on some of the issues that we went through. We originally were an absentee state prior to 1996. You had to have actually a reason. You had to be absent, and you had to get a notary to sign that. So it was a very simple process for those 30 people that got to vote absentee, if you could find a notary and such. But in 1996 is when we changed to no excuse voting. And from there is where I think a lot of folks are going to be now, is that pain point of exactly what Noah talked about. We no excuse voting, we thought it was great. And then the next thing you know, not planning for it, we get, and back, in 1996, we had, I think, 1.5 million voters. But we were inundated with 200,000 paper requests and didn't build up towards the online presence until about the 2002. But just as a progressive and to bring out this pain point to folks that are new to vote by mail, it's going to be, there is some pain points that can be avoided, such as Noah mentioned with regards to getting in front of your online request page. And I'll tell you how we resolved our 15 different counties having 15 different online requests. We prefer to get them direct to us because Maricopa is the fourth largest county in the United States. So a lot of the other 14 counties call us the great state of Maricopa because 3.4 million voters that maybe deserve, but getting it through the state is not a bad thing the way we have it arranged. So one of the lessons learned, I will tell you that Secretary of State, Secretary Hobbs has created a portal where all 15 counties are represented as far as an online request. So it is a centralized location if a voter can't find it. But when they go there, they click on the Maricopa County, it directs them straight as if they were still on that site to our online request page. So because we prefer that and I think Tina maybe have touched to it, that when they submit through that site, they're doing the work for us. They are literally flagging themselves, scheduling themselves. We have a robust, redundant CAPTCHA. We have asked for last four social, driver's license, something to validate, hanging our hat on the fact that on the back end, we do 100% signature verification regardless. So we've solved the state issue where we do want the state to be participatory and a partner, but some of the counties have very robust online, or in Maricopa, we have our own IT department. So bragging a little bit, but again, it's a large operation. So we can perform, whereas maybe a smaller county, Yuma County in Arizona doesn't have that, then the state has a online where they send them the data. It's not as efficient, but there is a statewide system that they can actually utilize to avoid having to key that in. But for us, again, in 1996, we switched over, no excuse. 2007 was our saving grace legislation, which created the permanent early voting sign-up. I think the pain point that most people are going to feel is having to do that manual labor, even if it is a barcoded request, which we too have. We actually have state legislation that requires third party to have all of those requests sent directly back to us. So the third party doesn't even get to collect. They had in the past, and in a timely fashion, and I use that with air quotes, in a timely fashion, they would get those to us. That meant, 1 day before the actual 27-day mailing period. So we added some teeth to the legislation to say that all requests, third party, political party must come directly back to us. So they can borrow our address, create a sub permit, and we get that handled that way. So a lot of lessons learned where you can still partner with those parties because they want to get their voters that ballot if that's what they're intending to do. And just like Noah said, I keep referencing Noah like he's the great king of elections because I know Noah and he is, so I keep giving him credit. But part of the thing is, genuinely, we have created in our early voting flagging system a comment or a capture field we can put down the United Workers of, and when we flag that, so we have them barcoded with the voter ID, where literally we'll get those, we'll scan those into that, under that category, and we can provide them daily, weekly reports that says, yes, this is how many got in. So a happy medium where it's not a lot of work for us they're gonna have those third-party cards, so we might as well create that atmosphere where we can work in partnership, saying, one, we're mandating you mail to us, but two, we will promise to give you, if you work with us ahead of time, to also let us look at that card. Because one of the lessons learned over the decades of doing this is we get a card that says name, and it's really great when it says John Stewart, and that's all it is, and an email at something yahoo.com. So we can't find that voter. So we partner with them to develop their cards. We give them the return address. We promise to give them data if they want that, and it works out well. So those are two of the things that, as was what was pointed out, look towards that if you still want that, you want that centralized location, but you still want to be able to control if indeed you have the ability to import that. But one of the biggest things I would say is the saving grace for us was permanent early voting. If you can push to legislation to that, because first and foremost, for us, for example, when we grew in 1996, and then we started growing from 100,000, from what I told you, the 3 or 50 people that could get a notary, to 200 by 2000, I want to say 8, we were up to 700,000 requests at every single election. We had to manually, even with the barcode, put those in. And it was the voters that were telling us, this is ridiculous that I have to remember to ask you for this ballot every single time. And there's some truth to that. So when we got that permanent early voting list, it removed the need for those human or the resources applied to entering those, and could focus those on the back end for return. So the permanent early voting list is one of the things if possible, I would push folks, because it literally is a push of the button to flag those. So it's a one-time entry instead of every election cycle entry. And it really does allow for those voters who want this process. And I'll tell you, my son, who's 20 years old, and you may have heard him, I had to tell him be quiet back here. He's still a kid, but he hasn't seen the inside of a bank. He hasn't seen the inside of a polling place, because, and I don't want to call him a millennial. He may hear me and he'll come in here scream. But those folks, there are folks that are like that, that this is the method. You know, ATM is the only thing they've ever seen as far as banks. So this process is more and more popular. In Arizona, 72% of our voters, as you know, the 1.7 million. But even with that, 80 to 85, in some elections, 90% of our returns are by the vote by mail process. So although we're not an all mail state, we practically are, and we're trying to educate our legislative body and our folks to say that maybe this is just the way to go. But in lieu of that, know that the permanent early voting is going to save you tons of headache with regards to personnel, staffing, and just the process onto itself. But you have to couple that with technology, automation, best practice such as barcodes and that kind of stuff. So I think for us, our challenges was that in between, where we went almost a decade with or vote by mail singular requests, up to the point where we got the permanent early voting list. And although the volume seems shocking, it's not. It's easily managed because it's all at your fingertips. 1.7 million, a push of a button, and then therein lies where automation and technology needs to come into place. But so that would be our biggest change, and we definitely have seen some of these pain points. So we're willing to share those, even if it's just for the sake of getting it off our chest and crying about it decades later.
Well, thank you very much. Noah, I knew you wanted to get something in there, so we'll give you this one, and then you can add whatever you wanted. And as Ray mentioned, certainly appreciate you being on here. Even though you're not wearing your gold jacket, you are an Election Center Hall of Famer. So,
Thanks, man. But the truth is, everything we learned, like the stuff I was pointing out, I think I learned from Ray. And this business is all about our colleagues. So, I've been consulting with CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, as part of the critical infrastructure. Ben, the Government Coordinating Council and Sector Coordinating Council have gotten together and been talking a lot about the implications of COVID-19. And fairly soon, I think there'll be some publications of a series of documents on how election officials can manage it. A lot of them are going to be focused on things having to do with increased number of people that are going to vote by mail. One of them in particular is things about absentee ballot requests. So we've highlighted a few of them, but I just want to take the opportunity to point to, hopefully it'll be your website or CISA's, that this series of documents will be available broadly to the community and help election officials, on paper, have some things to tick through as they make considerations. We talked about the efficiencies that are available with design and with online technology. It'd be important to highlight, though, that anytime you kind of change behavior, particularly when you rely on new technology and new practices, there are new kind of vulnerabilities that pop up. So, for instance, I would encourage all election officials that have an online portal or are building one, all those that have public-facing sort of websites where you can come download a vote-by-mail application, to have those scanned regularly. So the CISA offers vulnerability scanning for free for an hour's worth of work. To sign up, we can scan all these websites and all these applications. For those that do actual business transaction, like a portal that accepts voter information to do an online transaction, that we could do additional probative testing on. And I would certainly suggest election officials, while they're scrambling to figure out how to put out fair elections in this environment, not lose sight of the fact that our adversaries have sort of not cutting us any slack. In this environment, if anything, sort of we're potentially a riper target. And as our focus is shifted to changing our operations, we need to be sure that we're taking advantage of all of our partners on the election security front. And, CISA's got the aptitude to look at every election official's website in the entire country and could do that quickly, and we'd encourage you to sign up for it.
That's great. Thank you. Tina, can you talk a little bit about, again, so here we're at, we've hit on some of this, but again, just some of the things that you could sort of summarize or talk about, lessons learned or tips for jurisdictions preparing to handle this increase in absentee or mail ballot requests. I know we'd had a conversation the other day and you mentioned some work you've done around sort of social media ads and some other outreach. I thought those were great ideas.
Yeah. So a few things here. I think number one, we have to recognize this is a volume issue, right? So for my community, I'm going to go from 15,000 absentees maybe to 50,000 absentees. And so I know that I have the space. I know that I have the people. I know that I have the number of ballot bags I need to accommodate 15,000. But do I have all those things to accommodate 50,000? And so that's something that we have to think about is, okay, where am I going to put my application? So spatially, where am I going to store all the things I need to store? And again, with the ballot bags, something so simple that I know I need this many ballot bags typically for my absentee counting board, but do I have enough of those if my absentees triple? And so you're looking at those types of things. The machines that you can use to slice open the envelopes, that the automation from that of not having to wait for people to manually open things. The barcodes, we use those also for the apps and the ballots that we can scan those in. So the barcodes, the scanners, just is so important to recognize the volume and then recognize the need for organization in your own unit. And so one of the things that we are really big on in Rochester Hills is color coding everything. So we have I have 32 precincts, but I have 4 districts. And so everything for each of those districts is color coded the same. And so that helps with filing issues, that we make sure that, the correct ballot is being given out, because not only is the AV app color coded for each of those districts, but also the font on the ballot for that particular number on that ballot, we color code that also. So anywhere that we can help alleviate any errors for our staff and also ease for them to find something, we've implemented color coding as much as possible there. We've also done some, as you mentioned, with the social media, trying to do as much outreach as possible, doing some videos through like Adobe After Effects or Play to get as much information out to your voters as possible as the change of how things are going to be done now in your community or even in your state. Recognizing that in the volume of all of this, it also then requires requires funding, and I'm going to hit that again because we are going to need it. And it's super important for election officials across this country to make sure that their representatives know that we need funding in order to accommodate all of these changes. The equipment, the people, the space, all of those things, the trays that I'm going to need to store all my AV apps in. I don't have those now currently. I need funding to help purchase those things, to help hire those people, to help have those resources available so that we're not working with the resources that are only going to accommodate 15,000, that I have now the resources at my fingertips to accommodate 50,000. So we have to recognize that volume increase that we're going to have, and we have to respond in all of those ways through organization and through proper delegation of your staff, of going through. I mean, you are a project manager. If you're a clerk, you're a project manager. And so you're assigning duties, you're delegating duties, and you're delegating tasks as appropriate for that time period, and making sure that everyone is staying on task and everyone is educated the best that they can possibly be to do the best job that they can do. And so that's my job. And so I just say that goes from being, you know, you're doing a small family wedding to now you're doing the wedding for, you know, the next princess in England, right? So that's how this is changing for us. Again, it's volume, it's organization, and it's funding.
Thank you. And thank you for probably the best analogy of this webinar. Ray, you want to talk about any sort of tips or lessons learned that you haven't mentioned yet?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it's good the webinar is staying on the king of elections, you know, and holding a wedding for a princess. So, but the only thing is that lessons learned, again, we have tons of them. Some of them, but the biggest one is automation. I think if you're going to get to a volume, you want to start looking at that. And I hate to do it, but I'm going to give Noah a little bit more credit here with, I think CISA came out with a print vendor mail capacity document that I know election centers sent around that identifies, at least it was indicated that it was CISA and in concert with the EIGCC and so on. But it's basically a list of third-party vendors that are out there that just went out, I think, yesterday to election center members. Tim Matisse had sent it out. But if you can get your hands on that, it provides pretty much all of the print vendors or election vendors that are out there that can provide resources. Automation is the biggest thing. We realized that when we went from, again, 50 absentee voters to 700,000 to now 1.7 million, that we could not do it. We literally were manually inserting these, had cubbies galore for the 7,000 ballot variations, and had human errors when you're trying to pull precinct 001 versus 0010, and then this various ballot styles. So automation is a place, if I can push anybody, if anything, there are small scale and large scale vendors out there. Some that will give you what Orange County has, for example. I've seen Neil's operation. It's amazing. We have that exact same thing, except we have a vendor doing it for us where Neil's doing it in-house. As large as we are, we can get a good pricing to have this, without putting a plug, but have this insert machine that literally takes the data file that we push that's 1.7 million. We securely send that over, secure connection, FTP. They print the packet using a tested embedded system that inserts the ballot, the packet, everything, stickers, the great sticker. We're going back to that in Arizona. We had gone away, but just so you know, it's where you need to go if you're going to start looking at investing. And then again, I think it was mentioned by other participants here that there are large versions like that for 1.7 million. And then there are vendors that make a small version that is you can have in-house, a tabletop kind of version. So look at that, because that is the best place to begin investing. On top of all other things, automation is key for Maricopa with the 1.7 million. So if it works for 1.7 million, it'll work for 170,000. Just have to scale it up or down. I think the only other thing is emphasizing on that use of technology, but also best practice. Again, I'll I'll emphasize that we have a barcode that is everybody does on their outgoing packet, but ours is uniquely set up through, again, some lessons learned to be called a piece ID. It has multiple pieces, not just the voter ID or the affidavit, has several pieces that we can call upon when it's returned. Using automation, once again, we can actually take a picture, a scan of that return packet, and never have to touch the physical packet until we actually are ready to send it to a citizen board for opening. So what does the benefit of that? Again, use of technology, but more importantly, we're using a digital clipped image of that particular packet, which allows us to spread the wealth. And by that I mean is we have 3 offices in Maricopa County, one in our east side, central, downtown. We have over election staff. We just recently got up to 50 election staff. So we were operating with 21 at one point, but we have recorder staff. Because again, I mentioned that the county recorder who records deeds and all these mortgages and such has 40 staff that we train up. We do signature verification through affiliated forensic training, that same group that trains the FBI folks. We get those folks trained up, and when we say all hands on deck, we send those 80 people and say, open up a batch, and they are literally looking at a digital batch, not us having to worry about transporting live ballots. Live ballots are scanned on this automated equipment, put in a dry suppression vault, and waiting there for us to disposition. So one of the things is just lends itself to the conversation about automation, that inbound can also be automated to a point where we're able to, and we have the data snapshots, produce about 900 per hour per staff member. That's about 4 seconds, because with that barcode, it actually, when we get it inbound scan, it actually comes in, and part of our IT development was it pulls the voter registration for us in a system that actually shows us a clipped image along with the voter registration image without the staff member having to do anything but look at it, confirm, and click next. If it's an exception for our entry losers, then they move to a manager's queue. But the barcode and automation, if anything, is the most important. And I can tell you now that we have gotten to a point where we've been using this for quite some time, partner with a third-party vendor to do this. And we are able to do approximately, with 20 staff member, without having to reach out to the recorder, we can do about 7,200 per day per staff member, or 144,000 a day signature verification. That's with just 20 staff. Now imagine when we open up all 80 of our staff in all hands on deck towards the end, we can do over 500,000 signature verification in an 8-hour day. We have hit 100 to 200,000 being dropped off at the post office, and we've exercised that opportunity to get all hands on deck. But having that automation in front of it, it allows you to build towards these efficiencies. So I'm more than willing, if anybody needs information, or there are a lot of vendors out there, the one we use, I'll keep to myself so we can hold them hostage, but they're very reliable, and there are a lot of them out there. So look at that list of third-party vendors and look at automation for definitely this increase in capacity.
Great, thank you, Ray. Jonathan, do you want to add to that as far as sort of tips, lessons learned that you've seen in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I'll pick up a little bit where Ray left off. He talked about automation, mail processing. Obviously when you add, as we did, and it's been, done in Maricopa for a long time, but, county offices essentially turn into mail operations once you get that kind of volume. And I think Tina mentioned this as well. It's about volume. But I'll tie it into my earlier comment about engaging stakeholders. We don't often think of the U.S. Postal Service and the legislature in our states as stakeholders, but they're important stakeholders. In terms of the U.S. Postal Service, we engage them very early. For everything from designing the envelopes, to making sure that they're designed in a way that fits the mail equipment in the state. All the way to simple things on the back end, like making sure your county jurisdictions have enough green tags. Election mail gets prioritized by the U.S. Postal Service, but it only gets prioritized if they can find it. So, with the increased volume, you want to make sure, we work very closely with our state contact for the U.S. Postal Service, and also regional directors for the U.S. Postal Service, to make sure each one of our 67 county election offices has an adequate supply of green tags, so that the Postal Service knows where this election mail is, where it's coming from. I mentioned the legislature, and again, it's not traditionally viewed as a stakeholder, but thankfully we've had a good relationship with our legislature. And the last couple of years, the legislature here in Pennsylvania has also been very good about talking with county election folks, even down to the poll workers individually, as they're looking at some of these election reforms. And I'll give an example. Initially with Act 77, our legislature had put into place a process for the canvassing. So, in addition to providing for mail-in balloting, Act 77 also centralized the tabulation, the canvassing and tabulation of those ballots. They used to go out to the precinct, but the legislature extended the deadline for ballots to be received until 8 p.m. on Election Day, which means they had to also provide a central tabulation process for them, as opposed to having them sent out to the precincts. And initially, they had language in there that didn't allow the counties to start their canvass of those ballots until 8 p.m. on Election Day. But we were able to make, just a few weeks ago, some technical changes, including a change that allows counties to start that canvass process at 7 a.m. on Election Day. And it also streamlined the challenge process, which is an important component of the canvass process. You have to give political parties, you have to give candidates an opportunity. This is a transparent process. You have to give them an opportunity to potentially challenge ballots that they don't believe are valid, and streamline that process. They also, in Act 77, added a very strong public records provision that gives data, or enables political parties' candidates to get data about, where you're at virtually real time. How many ballots have gone out. They can get a list of the folks those were sent to. They know whether the ballots came back in. But all of those little details, it's very important to, before the legislature enacts legislation that you have to then figure out how to implement, being able to talk to them and kind of explain to them what the logistical challenges are, what the administrative challenges are before they enact the legislation, I think is very important to making sure you get a solution that, not only works in theory, but also works in practice.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to our closing comments, which I really think of as the chance where any of us that have done these always think, oh, I should have said this. Well, that's what this is the opportunity for. Any things that you thought of that you wish you would have said earlier. So Tina, I don't know if you want to kick us off with sort of closing thoughts on how people can anticipate handling these absentee ballot requests, or the increased volume around that, and any last minute thoughts you would offer.
Again, I want to say thank you, Ben. And I want to encourage people, if they haven't watched the other 2 interviews that you've done, that they go back and watch those. I did that, and I literally took 4 pages of notes from those other 2 interviews. So everybody else might not be that crazy, but I found some really good information in there. So thank you for that and for taking the time to do this. Again, I think that clerks are very resilient. We're going to find our way through this, but I have found, for me, a big bonus in this is the collaboration, and someone has already mentioned just the relationship with other election officials. I've been reaching out to election officials across the country who already handle absentee ballots in large volumes, asking what some of their tricks of the trade are, how do they do it, how can I implement that here in Michigan. So I think the collaboration with other election officials is really big, because some people are already doing things, and again, we don't need to reinvent that wheel, as was already said. We need to find where it's working and see how we can implement that here in our state. Also, it was mentioned too just recently about the relationship that you have with your representatives. And so it's so important, as we're moving forward with this, that we keep those lines of communication open as to what our needs are going to be, and how we need them to respond to us in order to help us do our jobs. And so we all want democracy to work. And sometimes some little tweaks are going to have to be made here and there. And if you have those established relationships and communication lines already open with them, it makes that ask a lot easier going forward. I would also say as we move forward these next several months as we go into November, the relationships that we'll have with our media are very important also, to make sure that we're getting the messages out, we're getting truth out, because that is a big factor right now, is that we're hearing a lot of misinformation, a lot of misdirected information, sometimes even people who have the best intentions. So again, having those relationships with the media and making sure that you are projecting truth out to them so that our constituents are hearing the correct message. It's all, again, about organization, and it's all about collaboration. And my number, my Twitter, my email, anything is available to anyone. I am willing to work with anyone, have conversation with anyone about how we can help each other and help our entire country move forward and pull off successful elections, no matter what we're facing.
Thank you, Tina. Great points. Jonathan, you want to share any closing thoughts?
Sure. I first want to thank you as well, Ben, for putting this together. Appreciate the opportunity. And Tina, that you're not the only election geek. I've actually been, I watched the other two videos, took notes, and I've been sneaking some notes during this one as well. You know, I guess I'll pick up on two things. One thing I forgot to say, we do have, and Ray did a very good job of explaining the benefits. We do have a permanent voter list too. That was another provision that was added. It was actually streamlined. It's a little different probably than Maricopa County, but you can, counties have to send, if you request to be put on the permanent list, counties automatically send you a request of application every year in February, and that entitles you to receive a ballot for every election during that calendar year, every primary or election during that calendar year. Up through the third Monday in the following February, if you have any special elections. And I also wanted to just pick up, Noah mentioned something earlier too, is very important. We can't forget the security here. You know, we seem to move from one thing to another. We're dealing with this pandemic right now, but we haven't forgotten the security. You know, I mentioned earlier that one of the limitations, that the limitation of our online request is that we only allow folks who have a driver's license or a PennDOT ID to use the application. And that's because we didn't want to rush in the last four of Social Security number. You know, putting something like that into place has a lot of considerations. You know, beyond the normal IT ones, you also have to make sure whatever interface you set up to check that ID is secure. So I wanted to pick up on what Noah said earlier. And, you know, we can't forget the security and integrity aspect of this as we're focusing on, you know, making it more convenient for voters to vote and making it safe for voters to vote as well. You know, all of these things play a role, and you can't forget any one part of them.
Great points. Thank you. Ray, closing thoughts?
I echo what everybody's saying. Thank you, Ben, for having us. And I agree 100% with Tina with regards to reinventing the wheel, except for in Maricopa, we use the term R&D, and everybody thinks that's research and development, and it's not. It's rob and duplicate. So we are experts at that. We definitely have grown our best practices out of other people's pain points and lessons learned. So please indeed do utilize all election officials. The EAC has a list of great best practices, so I push that. As far as a vote by mail closing comment, the one thing I did not mention was what goes out obviously must come back in, but what goes out is important to be as clean as possible. And by that I mean in Arizona, with the 1.7 million people in Maricopa at least, 3 million I think total throughout the state, but here and there, for us, part of our statutory requirement is we mail a notice to the voter, not to sign them back up. So it's similar to what Jonathan mentioned, but 90 days prior to an election, we send them a 90-day notice that says, hey, you're going to get this on this day. Is everything still the same? But part of that is to inform them, but also to do the reg verification process ahead of a mailing. So we want to test those addresses. We want to make sure they're still good a year from now ahead of that mailing. So there is some things, if you're looking at not so much a singular early ballot request, but if you're looking at the permanent early voting process, know that there's some lessons learned as to how to do voter maintenance. One of the things we just recently, I say recently in the last 4 years, have jumped onto, most voter reg verification requires some sort of return service requested indicator. We've actually changed over to electronic service requested. This has been around and weren't aware that it's part of the first class postage rate. But instead of getting that, what I call the yellow sticker of death, where packages, if we have 1.7 million and we have a 10% attrition of voters 2 years down the road, we could have 170,000 voters that have moved and have not updated with us. They don't realize they update their driver's license, they update their Netflix, everything else but their voter registration. So using this electronic service requested, what it does is we mail out that 90-day card and we get, let's say that 170,000. It's gotten a lot better. We're down to maybe about 5% because of our constant mailings. But 170,000, instead of manually having to key those, it's an electronic file coming directly from the USPS that is equal to that yellow sticker, and we import it. Literally, again, push of the button, 170,000, and there's different codes in there. They're temporarily away, we scrub those out, that we're not trying to deactivate or test their address. If they're out of county or out of state, we send them, we scrub them out, we opt them out for an early ballot, which is not taking them off the permanent early voting list, but we hold on that and we send them instead a cheap registration verification letter rather than a $3 early ballot packet that has a live ballot. So that's one of the things I think that I'm most impressed with our process, that in doing this for the last couple of years, that we have become very efficient in cleaning up our rolls, maintaining our rolls, but more importantly, not just preventing a live ballot from going out, but also helping the voter get that address updated in time to get a ballot for that election. So that's one of the things I forgot to mention, but I think it's important if you're looking at that permanent early voting list. And I will, again, echo the communication part that Tina indicated. We've gone to a very robust social media, especially in light of this pandemic. We've asked our board for extra monies, and that may be something that we need, or other election officials should look at to now, saying this is unprecedented. We went to our board and they approved over $400,000 to buy ads, to look at social media, we've created a new dashboard, the BeBallotReady.vote, that gives the voter information about how to participate in one central location for just them. They put their information in, tells them everything they need to know about their voter record and how to participate. But that costs money, and communication, I think, is key on top of all of this other automation and best practice.
That's great, thank you. And Noah, you want to back clean up for us here?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for hosting this, Ben. Elections are hard to administer in the best of times, and these are crazy times. I don't know any election official that would choose to institute the operational changes that are coming in a presidential general election. The burdens that election officials face are significant right now. I'm really impressed with the elections, the leadership, both the political and operational level coming out of states, like Jonathan, and I'm always super impressed with the administration down at the local level with people like Tina and Ray. Election officials are absolute heroes. I just think they should know that in the EAC and in DHS CISA, they've got federal partners to help back them up. I think now is the time to sort of believe the creed that we are our brother's keepers, we are our sister's keepers. I would encourage everybody to lean into one another. There's no reason to make this stuff up and start from scratch to reinvent the wheel. No matter where you're going to in your new election processes for November, somebody else has done that. At the federal level, we're trying to compile a lot of those considerations and publish them quickly. Please go to the EAC and to CISA for that advice, and then lean in on your colleagues. We'll get through this together. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Noah, and echo that. Really appreciate you all taking the time. Know everyone is extremely busy at this time of the year and dealing with all of these issues. We will, any resources you want to send our way, the ones that Noah mentioned, we'll put up on the website. As you know, we continue to build out these pages around COVID-19 response for elections, and appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.